Welcome to In Plain Sight. My name is Shamim Momin. I'm the Senior Curator at the Henry Art Gallery, and I am looking forward to taking you through the show. What we have here, as you might guess from the title, is a group exhibition, a thematic exhibition, that engages artists whose work addresses narratives, communities, histories that are typically hidden or invisible in our public space, and that's both conceptually and literally defined. So that's fundamentally a concept that runs throughout, is that history isn't a static thing, that there isn't one true story, one true voice. And these artists are all proposing the truth of the matter, so to speak, that the messy, chaotic, three-dimensional truth of our lived existence is one of multiple diverse voices coming from many different directions, creating kind of much rounder, richer, deeper sense of who we are in the world and what our identities may be. There are 14 artists in the show, and they are from all around the country as well as fundamentally from all around the world in terms of their background and their experiences. And they are all accessing this idea, this thematic. So you'll see as we walk through everything from kind of deliberately activist endeavors, unpacking of individual histories that have been excluded historically due to race, ethnicity, class, sexuality, explorations of coded language for protection, secrecy, or sometimes both, covert systems of labor, exploitation, capitalist control, that comes in there as well. Often you'll see these things through a kind of oblique or fantastical interpretive strategy, as well as kind of documentary strategy as well. I'm going to start with an artist named Tom Burr, who lives in New York and has been working for 30 plus years, thinking about the intersections between particularly queer sexual identities with public and private spaces. So again, how our very beings and how we interact with people, our communication systems, are actually embedded in the way we use space. Our pathways and meeting points are mapped through a city, urban archaeology of that nature, and how it contains the very essence of human communication within it. It's an installation called Walls. There are 9 sculptures of walls of various shapes and sizes throughout the institution, throughout the Henry. They are in sort of awkward, unusual spots throughout the building, but they're created so that they seem at first to be perhaps a part of the architecture. So they were designed in concert with our exhibition designer to kind of match the architectural tone, the width, the feel. But then at the same time, as you encounter them, they have a kind of purposelessness, or they seem to not function in the way that we're used to. They're oddly long and narrow in some spaces. You'll see they're all different throughout. Some of them create these kind of intimate spaces for interaction within the institution itself. So a moment to pause, and kind of you often have to step very close to them to see what the texts are that are written on the walls themselves. The work was actually conceived by Tom in the late 80s, if I recall. He was collecting at that time a magazine, print magazines, if you remember those, called the Spartacus International Gay Guide. And, pre-internet and all of that, this was one of the ways in which the queer community really could communicate with one another, could share information, and often information that was really quite critical to how they existed in the world. And that's one of the areas that he was interested in. So subscribers could actually submit different kinds of meeting places or sites, whether they were a good place to meet people and what kinds of people and things like that. What struck him as well was that even though these were submitted to this magazine that's specifically for this populace, the queer community, they were still written in a kind of code, a kind of abbreviated, nuanced, often in acronyms of what things mean. There was still kind of this sense of needing to be secret, of needing to communicate in a way that not everybody would understand. Here we have one in the lobby space, which is actually a meeting point and a space of rest and reflection, not announcing itself in any spectacular way, but suggesting as well some questions about why it's there. Moving from the landing into this first gallery, as you can see, this is a full total installation here in this gallery space by the artist Sadie Barnette. One of the core anchors of her work for quite a number of years has been the FBI file that was created around her father, Rodney Barnette, who founded the Compton, California chapter of the Black Panther Party in 1968, that she finally was able to gain access to under the Freedom of Information Act in recent years. So you may be familiar with the COINTELPRO program, through which the FBI targeted many Black Panther Party members, among other kind of civic leaders, as extremists and terrorists even, and then kind of very aggressively tracking everything down to like what flights he took, who he talked to on them. Their neighbors were aggressively interviewed. It made one a target of kind of suspicion by your own community. So it was really quite traumatic in terms of what it could do to the people that were targeted by the COINTELPRO program. One of the things that struck Sadie when she did get this giant file, which had such extraordinary detail and intimate detail about her father's life, was that at the same time it was also extraordinarily two-dimensional, just very much black and white facts, but that were nonetheless imbued with a very particular agenda that was part and parcel of the COINTELPRO story. So in reclaiming this information, not just her father's, but all of the rest of the folks who were implicated within that file, and using it as part of her artwork, this is really a gesture for Sadie to kind of take that one version of life and combine it with the real life that she knew, that she grew up with, of her existence and her family and her community, and to kind of insert within that the joy and the potential that is embedded within that, adding some of her kind of signature components, the glitter, the pink paint, inserting these kind of like triggers of gay aesthetics. For her was a kind of mode of power, a way of reclaiming. And so she's actually used this holographic paint on top of where the file was redacted. And so again, kind of reclaiming those blank spaces, those voids, and pulling them back into this living, dynamic existence. So you'll see up in the vault the glittered security cameras that are part of Sadie's sculptural work for the show. So they're clustered in odd spaces, and as you notice them here and there, more than you would normally see in any one space, they become a kind of, group of spies, kind of eyes looking at you as you move through the room. For Sadie, in terms of constructing this installation, she's kind of separated the room into sort of two modalities, which you can see represented by the two different wall treatments. There is wallpaper that she's created where she's extracted and repurposes those redacted stamps into the wallpaper surrounding the walls and kind of made them kind of a chaotic pattern, disabuse them of their power to some extent. And then on the other side of the room, you have the more domestic space of communication. So you have this extraordinary holographic couch, reclaiming these thrift store objects, domestic objects, and then adding to them the bling aesthetic, as she puts it, that enlivens them in a different way, creates almost a futuristic style to the way that the room is laid out. The glittering of the TV, the mirrored table, which again is a found object, and then combining that with the selections of family photographs. So these are all real family photographs that are then translated onto print material and in some cases enlarged, like the photograph of her aunt. As I recall, the artist mentioned that her aunt had made the outfit that she's wearing there. So it's a kind of, pose of both power and pride and presentation. Really thinking about how oneself presents, how one claims identity and claims one's space in the world. So that becomes a part of how one experiences this space as well. And then on the other side, you have the hairpick wallpaper, which is an image she uses quite often. Reclaimed here as a point of design, it takes again on its power and its repetition throughout, and embracing the room of this, site of domestic space and of personal interaction and relationships, the true rich stories that connect past and present and really structure the family unit. Thank you so much for joining us today at the Henry, well, virtually at least, for our tour of In Plain Sight. Please stay tuned for the next chapter, in which we'll be walking through the installations of Nicole Miller and Allison O'Daniel. See you there.